let me start this meeting of the New York State Cemetery Board. Call it to order. Just a couple preparatory remarks. We're doing this on WebEx, which is consistent with the new law. We also have two board members here in person, so we're doing kind of a hybrid approach. We will have an opportunity for public participation. When we do, please, if you are required to identify yourself, and actually it's helpful to identify yourself anytime you speak, because that helps us with our minutes. This meeting is recorded, but if you identify yourself and speak, that's helpful. If you're not speaking, please mute your line. That would be also helpful. I don't think we need an executive session, but if we do, we will find a way to do that in a different room or here and have folks absent. And then we will not generally take action in executive session. We won't adjourn the meeting first, but when we come out of executive session, we'll report on anything that we did take action on. I'm hearing some background noise again, so if you can, please mute your line. First thing, let me just again introduce myself. I'm Mark Pattison, representing Secretary of State Rossano Rosada and Chair of the Board. Tom?
This is Thomas Fuller, representing Dr. Howard Zucker for the Department of Health.
And Jill?
Hi, I'm Jill Faber, representing Attorney General Letitia James.
So we have a full participation of the board. Let me ask Rob Vandervlies, who's there she is. Rob Vandervlies, who's our counsel, to just make sure we understand what rules we're operating under today.
Certainly. This is Rob Vandervlies, interim counsel to the Division of Cemeteries and Cemetery Board. We are operating pursuant to Chapter 417 of the laws of 2021, which permits state entities, including a board, to meet and take such action authorized by law without permitting in-person access to meetings, and authorize such meetings to be held remotely by conference call or a similar service, provided that the public has the ability to view or listen to such proceedings and that such are recorded and later transcribed. We have chosen to permit in-person access in Albany. The board is appearing by video conference, and we are recording this meeting and will be later transcribed.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I think we can dive right into the meeting. We have distributed to the board members minutes of the past meeting. Does anybody have any corrections, changes, objections, suggestions to the minutes as distributed?
None here.
No.
Okay. So I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes of the previous meeting. Just one? Louis?
Yeah, just the previous meeting.
The last August meeting as distributed. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Great. Minutes are accepted. Thank you very much. Next on our agenda is legislation regulations, pending legislations, and some information about our proposed abandonment regulations. Rob, would you like to make a report?
Of course, this is Rob Vandervlies. There is no legislative update on the regulatory front. We have received approval to publish the notice of proposed rulemaking for regulations related to abandoned cemeteries. We are hoping to get that into the September 29th State Register or the October 6th.
And what's the process after that?
So there will be a 60-day comment period where the public can make comments, and then we will respond to those comments and then take it from there.
Okay.
Adoption or
Right. Great. So I'm just stating that just because it's important that we did do lots of, or I don't know if the adjective lots of, but we worked with NYSAC and other stakeholders in the development of the regulation, but now we're in the formal comment period, and we certainly encourage people to comment on the proposed regulations when they see them. Again, our goals for that were to fulfill the request by the then governor, who vetoed legislation, but asked if the division could address some of the concerns through regulatory changes, and that was what we're trying to do there around the issues of abandonment and consolidation. So, okay, you have any more, Rob?
No,
At this time, thank you very much. We have with us both Louis Polishuk and Alicia Young, who are director and assistant director of the division. Louis, do you have a report?
Such as it is, yes, I do. So, first thing, on the forms, we're pretty much done with the following forms: mausoleum columbarium applications, permanent maintenance loans, and major renovations, and the supporting schedules. There were just a couple of typos that, well, we made some last-minute adjustments to the forms that created a little bit of formatting funkiness that's being resolved, I hope soon. And we should have those posted and available for everyone to use by the time of our next meeting. I mean, we should have them today, but it's just, when you fix one thing, the other thing moves. It's really like typography and stuff like that, typesetting, that's the issue at this point, not anything of substance. But the time to correct these is now, and not to put out things that look funky. Number 2, staffing. We are in the thick of interviews for the associate accountant position here in Albany, and for an administrative position, assistant position also in Albany. We anticipate completing those interviews this week, at which point we will hopefully then check the references of our top candidates, after which we're back to the hurry up and wait stage, because apparently many divisions have recently been able to fill positions that they weren't able to fill before, which means that HR and diversity and inclusion are getting all of the packets requesting approval. So that may slow things down a bit, but hopefully sometime October or early November, we will have filled those 2 positions. We have 3 other fills, 2 senior accountants and an investigator in Buffalo that we're seeking to go ahead and fill, but we're waiting on the division of budget for approval. But that's where we are with staffing, so that's progress. Number 3 is we are working on an administrative consolidation of our consolidation of our administrative functions here in Albany. I'm going to take my mask off to make sure this is really clear. For anyone watching out there in TV land, the best way to send anything to us is by email. Email to any staff member. We'll get it to we will get it to the right person. We do also have the cemetery reports. They're still working, right? Mm-hmm. The cemetery reports, email cemetery reports at dos.ny.gov. That's all one word, cemetery reports, no dot. If you want to get in touch with us directly, that's also a good way. You can also use that. It is not just for annual reports. If you're sending us anything, we're checking that box regularly and we can look at it. If you need to send something by mail, please only send 1 copy. Please do not send it by FedEx. It does not get here any faster. Don't waste a not-for-profit money using FedEx for things. And don't send us 2 copies of things, because what we do with that second copy is we throw it out or recycle it. We can't have our files stuffed up with extra copies of things. So any submissions in paper should be single copy, sent by regular mail, and only to our Albany office. Do not send stuff to the regional offices. Do not send stuff to the New York City office. Everything should come here in Albany, ideally by email if that's not possible, by regular mail, or in the case of Mr. Fleming over there, he can just walk it over. Or he can call us and we can go get it from him, since they're next door. But we're trying to cut down on the volume of paper and losing stuff or having to keep track of stuff coming to different things. As part of that, our complaint form is in the process of being updated. It's going to direct everyone to submit complaints to here in Albany. Longer term goal would be to have an electronic portal similar to the annual report form for submitting complaints and pretty much everything else. I wouldn't expect that to happen anytime soon. So this is, for the foreseeable future, this is going to be a reality. So I just wanted to get that out there. Other than that, if you hear of any stresses on the death care industry, please let us know. I haven't heard of any. We do have somewhat of an increase in, he puts on his mask as he says the word COVID. We do have somewhat of an increase, obviously, in COVID cases. It does not seem to be causing any stress on the system, but if you see any issues, please let us know. I also got a report that a crematory was closed down for several days. I got that report secondhand. If a crematory has to close temporarily, please do me a favor. Do us a favor, call us, let us know you're doing it. If you're closing one retort out of 5 for re-bricking and it's going to be offline for a day, no, you don't need to let us know that. But if the whole crematory is going to be closed for 3 days, please do call us and let us know. Last thing, which is not on the agenda, city cremations. We issued a notice of proposed penalty to them. They've given us a response. Their response raised some additional questions. We issued a letter on September 2nd asking for more information. Their deadline to respond has not passed. We anticipate that we will be asking the board in October to refer this matter to an ALJ for an administrative hearing on the penalty. But that's not really right yet because we still have additional information that we needed that we're going to have to. And there also is some degree of ongoing talks with them. If that can somehow resolve the issue consensually, that would also be nice. But it's not on the agenda, and we're not asking anyone to do anything about it right now. Just thought I'd let you know. Last thing in the realm of letting you know, again, it's not on the agenda because there's nothing to do. But the auditors at Mount Olivet said that their report was, they're going to need an extra week or two on their report. Originally, their draft was going to be finished last Monday. So I'm guessing by next Monday it should be done, if not before. I'll follow up with them. Again, our deadline for them to supplement their response is October 31st. So there's nothing we need to do today, but I thought people should know about that. And that is.
Thank you. I want to remind people to mute their line if they're not speaking. I still hear some background noise. And if Louis, anybody has any questions for Louis? Do you have any questions for board members? Have any questions for Louis? No? Okay. Thank you, Louis. Let's move to the vandalism fund report and then vandalism applications. Alicia?
Okay, for the 2021 calendar year, vandalism collections are $567,908. Assessment collections are $318,361. Fiscal year collections from April 1st, 2021, vandalism $136,083. Assessment $75,436. Payments from the $2 million 21-22 vandalism fund appropriation include the first 25% payments of 7 applications approved so far this year, totaling $73,737.04. There remains $108,254.84 of funds committed for the 2018-19 and 19-20 applications, and $178,029.35 committed for applications approved in the 2021 fiscal year. Currently, there are 5 applications in the pipeline for approval, totaling $90,189.88. Additionally, there are 3 applications on the agenda for this meeting, totaling $86,832.30. So far, the 7 restoration applications we have approved so far this year total $294,948.16.
Lots of sense.
You got that, right?
It'll be a quiz later.
It'll be a quiz later. Does anybody have any questions for Alicia on the vandalism fund? Okay, let's move to the applications. I do note on at least my form, it shows 1 form, but there are 3 listed, so there are 3, right?
Listed 3 on the front.
Yeah, on the front.
Listed 3.
Didn't pick it up the back.
Sorry about
Just let you know. So, can we start with Black River Cemetery in Jefferson County? Has an application of dangerous monuments for $28,653.20. Do you have somebody who can present that?
Mike, are you on the phone?
Yes, this is Mike Seelman with Division of Cemeteries. Black River Cemetery has submitted an application for 30 hazardous monuments. I went out, looked at the monuments, and determined that they appeared hazardous. They received 2 bids for the repairs. The lesser of the 2 bids was $28,425. There was a question on the bid because it listed landscaping, and I questioned the cemetery and actually both of the contractors, and they all agreed that the cemetery had submitted bid specifications to the contractors and stated that any damage that was done to the turf or the grounds due to the repairs would be corrected by the contractor. The TF Wright was the contractor that had the low bid, and they opted to itemize that charge. The other contractor, Kazi Memorials, did not itemize it. So I want to be clear that that landscaping is just for repair of any damage that's done to the grounds. And then the other thing to point out is that the legal notice was run properly. However, the 60-day period does not expire until September 26th. So the cemetery's been notified that if they receive any response from the legal notice, they're to let us know. I recommended approval of this in the amount of $28,653.
Rob, do you have anything to add to this application?
Yes, Mark, I do. I have one question just regarding the landscaping. My understanding is that the grading and reseeding that would happen around the hazardous monument, that is a work that's typically been performed in the repair of hazardous monuments.
Yeah, I mean, it's just typically not broken out like this.
Understood. And then I would echo division that the 60-day notice period has not yet expired. That will expire on September 26, 2021, and that if the board did approve this application would make its approval contingent upon no monument owner coming forward to perform work, and the work by the contractor not begin until after September 26, 2021.
Great. Okay, so does anybody have any questions regarding this application from Black River Cemetery? Tom? Jill? If that's the case, then I'll make a motion to approve the application of Black River Cemetery in Jefferson County in the amount of $28,653.20, contingent on the fact that there's no negative comments from lot owners during the comment period.
That no owner come forward to repair the monument.
And right, and no owner comes forward to repair the monuments. And amend that. And the date of that is September 26th, 2021. Assuming that motion is clear enough. Sound clear enough, Rob? Okay. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second. Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye.
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 Motion for Black River carries. Second application for a dangerous monument is Grove Cemetery in Steuben County in the amount of $32,833. Do we have somebody who can present that?
Yeah, this is Ron Stamp with the Division of Cemeteries. Grove Cemetery is located in the town of Bath, village of Bath. They've previously applied to us and had restoration work done. This is an additional round. I visited the cemetery. The monuments they selected appeared appropriate, and I have recommended approval of this application in the amount of the lower estimate plus the legal notice, and that total is $32,833.
Okay. Rob, do you think you add to this application?
No comments from council.
Okay. So does anybody, board members have any questions for this application? So I'll
No.
make a motion. Yes? No?
No, I said no.
Okay, thank you, Joe. I'll make a motion to approve the application of Grove Cemetery in Steuben County for danger monuments repair in the amount of $32,833. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Tom seconds it. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion
Aye.
carries. The last one is Riverside Cemetery in Shimon County in the amount of $25,346.10. Is someone who can present that to the board?
Yep, Brendan Stanton again. Riverside Cemetery is located Chemung County. The town of Chemung. This too is an additional second project, with more monuments that were not included the first time because it's often difficult to find a contractor who wants to work on that many at the same time. I visited the cemetery, reviewed the monuments that they had identified. They did appear hazardous, and I have recommended in favor of approval of this application in the amount of the lower estimate plus the legal notice, totaling $25,364.10.
Rob, do you have anything to add to this application?
No comments from council.
Thank you. Any questions from board members about this application?
No?
Thank you. I'll make a motion to approve the application for dangerous monuments by Riverside Cemetery in Chemung County in the amount of $25,346.10. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Motion seconded. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you very much. We have 4 other applications. Can I take them in order?
Mark, before we move on, I just want to point out that, as Alicia's numbers indicate, we still have more than adequate funds to process more of these applications. So if there are cemeteries out there that have hazardous monuments, by all means, give us a call. We can come out and look at them, and if they're in fact hazardous, we can. There's a reason this program exists.
And if there are barriers to that, let us know that as well.
Right. If you run into issues with contractors or the like,
Or
more or whatever it is,
or our own processes.
Right, I mean, one thing that we've heard rumblings about is the payment split, but for us to be able to do anything about that, we'll need real specifics as to why it presents an issue. So if you're in a position where I have 3 guys who would love to do this work, but they can't do it because X, Y, or Z, then by all means, let us know.
Yeah, we're just open to suggestions. Okay, thank you, Louis. Again, we have 4 applications before us. I can take them in order.
Yeah, sure.
The first is Northridge Cemetery for a column Barium. And who's going to present that?
This is Mike Seelman. Northridge Burial Association is a 38-acre cemetery in Niagara County. They currently have 48 niche columbarium. At the time that they applied, they had 11 spaces remaining, so they felt that they needed to add another unit. They've requested approval for installation of a 48 niche columbarium. It'd be located next to the existing columbarium, all the way at the rear of the cemetery. I was out there in the spring and I noted that they had their appropriate postings at the location and at the entrances. I think the last date they were accepting comment was June 6th, and they have not received negative comments. The total cost of this, including the foundation, which will be installed by cemetery employees, is $22,250. I will yield to the accounting staff as far as the comment on the return on investment. From the investigative side, however, they've seemed to have met the requirements of the regulation.
Have an accounting report?
Yeah,
Kathleen's not on today.
okay, so do you want to do it? Or
You can do it.
So basically, this cemetery needs to raise its rates for this project to be profitable. They're just charging too little for
Additionally, too, the Kathleen's ROI nets out the permanent maintenance allocations, so
Okay.
that's how we arrive at a negative 1%.
Right, so we haven't been, traditionally, we netted out the permanent maintenance calculation in determining the return on investment. Quite frankly, that doesn't make sense.
Right, we're considering it an expense, but it's not really an expense, it's just moving money from one account in the cemetery to another.
So the project, even without an increase, strictly speaking, does make money. It does not make operating money. It more or less breaks even on operating costs, but it doesn't make money on operations. The cemetery, do we have people on from the cemetery?
I believe so.
Yeah, I mean, we had initial conversations with them where they expressed openness to revisiting their price schedule to make sure that they actually make money and have used this to help with long-term sustainability.
Okay.
I don't know if they have anything to add on
Is there
that.
somebody from the cemetery who would like to address the board in this application?
This is Mary Evans.
Oh, great.
I'm from the Northridge Burial Association Board, and we did send in that we had increased our niches for the columbarium, the upper level to 800, the middle level to 600, and the lower level to 500. The board felt that that was adequate to cover the cost and make a small profit. I'm not sure why you have a negative rate of return on that.
Like I said, part of that is because we treated your permanent maintenance allocation as an expense rather than as profit, which is defensible as a matter of accounting, but maybe not so
Doesn't
sensible.
clearly show the picture.
Right.
Well, I think it's up to the board of the cemetery to decide what the rates are. So this is just a conversation about the long-term sustainability of the cemetery, and we appreciate, as always, we appreciate the efforts that the cemetery boards, the association, puts in to maintain the cemetery and keep it operating. So if there's not anything else, go ahead. Mary.
Just add one more thing. We have a sizable amount in our permanent maintenance, which we do try to generate income, which does come back to the current maintenance fund. That's why we have that amount in the permanent maintenance. So it does generate income for current maintenance every year.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
Does the board have any questions of either the cemetery operators or the division?
So they can change their prices anytime they want.
Right, niche prices are a form of lot price, they don't need our approval. They just have to send in something in writing showing what their prices are.
Okay.
The inurnment charge is a service charge, and that would require our approval.
All right, okay. Rob, did you have anything yet?
Thanks, Mark. I do have one question. An estimate of the trust funds and current maintenance funds required to maintain and preserve the facility. So do we have, my understanding is that typically these are very small for maintaining a columbarium, but I was wondering if the division or the cemetery could speak to those
Was that in
costs.
our ROI?
I don't think she did, because,
There really isn't any maintenance.
I mean, how often do you power wash your existing columbarium?
Are you
That's the question.
sorry?
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah, Mary.
I'm sorry. I don't know that we have power washed it. Our superintendent is in a funeral this morning. He has a funeral, so I can't speak to that. But I don't recall seeing any expense that came through on that. So if it was done, it was probably just done by the superintendent at the time.
So the cost of maintenance is essentially zero, and that's why we didn't.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. I have nothing further. Thank you.
Okay, did everybody understand what issue Rob raised though?
Right, it's in the regulations, the cost of maintenance. Really, the regulations address both mausoleums and columbariums, and some of the pieces of it have more significance to the mausoleum project than a prefab columbarium project.
Okay, but it's important for us to raise that issue, and that's a little bit about the question of pricing. Right?
I
Okay.
just have one question, just one question before we move on
Yeah.
this. So just to clarify, the reports that we're reviewing, the calculations and the accounting determinations, those are based on the previous prices. I know the representative said that they had been increased, but because we weren't aware and those did not get incorporated into the report, we're looking at those calculations based on the previous prices. Is that correct?
I don't think so.
I don't think that's correct. I did a little.
Okay.
Mark saw me futzing on my phone before. I was doing a little math. The total niche sales prices they projected divide out to 600 per niche.
Okay.
Which is consistent with lower being 400, middle being 600, upper being 800.
Okay.
Of course, they are likely at some point before they sell out the project. I think it's not unreasonable to think they might raise that price, and the cost will be a sunk cost. So that's going to be just additional profit. Also, we didn't take into account that doesn't take into account the inurnment revenue. Presumably, inurnments create positive income.
Right.
So I thought I understood you say that when you look at the return on investment and you take away the permanent maintenance fund, which is not exactly right in terms of
Not a true expense.
true expense, that they have a positive
Correct.
return on investment.
It's small, but it's
Small
Right.
positive return on investment.
I mean, on some level, if the cemetery is even just going to break even on a columbarium project, we're almost always going to recommend approval, although we'll recommend they look at their prices again, because there's value independent of the income to being able to offer the service. If they're out of niches, that's going to hurt them overall because they're not making a lot of money on selling them. As long as they're not losing money by offering the service, having it is a positive.
But they show a positive return
But they
on
actually
investment.
show a positive. Their total funds will go up as a result of this project, even without price
And
increases.
she mentioned that they also take income out of their permanent maintenance fund, which comes back around.
Right.
Yeah, they're actually in pretty decent shape in terms of permanent assets per acre.
Okay.
They're over 80 grand. So that ain't bad.
Does that answer your questions, Jill?
Yes.
Okay, so if there are no other questions by the board, I'll make a motion to approve the application by Northridge Cemetery to add additional columbarium, and I closed the application, but the total amount was
28.8, I think? Where did it go? Sorry, just found it. 21.5.
$21,500. Do I have a second? Jill, second? Tom's arm is broken.
Second. Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Next application is Woodlawn Cemetery.
Thank
Say
you.
No yes, thank you, Marion. Again, thank you and
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
and your fellow board members for all that you do. The next one is Woodlawn Cemetery, a non-pro-tunc columbarium application. Somebody want to present that?
This is Mike Seelman again. Woodlawn Cemetery is a 46-acre cemetery in Erie County. They had a mausoleum and columbarium that was becoming full. At the time, they had 10 niches remaining. In 2019, they had a board meeting where the former president expressed the need to install a new columbarium. They approved installation of a 48-niche columbarium, which was installed after that meeting. The total cost of this columbarium was $23,676. That's for foundation, installation, delivering the unit itself, and everything. They did not at that time seek approval. It's been explained to me that they, I guess, were unaware that approval was required. So since the installation of that, they have sold 12 niches and recouped the cost of installation. The cemetery has since requested this approval after the fact. I would indicate they did not post a legal notice, and therefore they had no negative comment. However, they have sold 12 units since it's been installed, which implies that it was a an attractive project. So based on that, I've recommended approval after the fact. And if there's any financial questions, again, I'll yield to the accountant.
Hey, Mike, I think there might be a couple of things that are worth elaborating on. Where is so this was their second one, right?
That is correct. They have a mausoleum unit with a columbarium, and this is located in the vicinity of that.
Okay, that was going to be my second question, and then the third question is, how close is this to existing interments? I mean, is it right on top of anyone's grave? In other words, Mike.
It does not appear to be encroaching upon existing graves. I have not been to the site, but I have reviewed the map, and Cindy Craig has been to the site and viewed it.
So it's not all that close. Okay, that was really what I wanted to. Sorry. You guys have.
Rob, do you have anything to add to this?
I do have a couple of questions. My understanding from the division is that some niches have been sold. Are there cremains within any of the niches?
Mike, there are, right?
Repeat the question.
So have cremains been placed in the columbarium at this time?
Yeah, they've sold them
Well,
and they've.
I think so. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I do not know specifically if the inurnments have been made. However, I do know that the niches have been sold.
With a project like this, in a smaller cemetery, correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, I'd say it's more likely that these sales would have been made at or close to need and not pre-need.
It would depend. You know, a lot of people when they're doing pre-needs will plan a cremation and they'll set that up at that time ahead of need. So it could be 50-50.
Right, so out of 50-50, if you've got 12, then you almost certainly have one.
Probably, yeah.
Well, we don't know the answer though, right? That's a educated guess.
And my understanding from the division looking into this is that in 1996, they erected a mausoleum without first obtaining board approval.
Correct.
Yes.
And then sought approval on Proton.
Did we find the minutes on it?
It's a little unclear as to whether or not it went before the board. We became aware of it.
There's, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, my recollection is that there's zero overlap between the current board and the folks who were there in 96.
Thank you, Louis. You anticipated my next question.
I'm pretty sure we looked at this.
That's my understanding.
Well, I guess whether it's in regards to this application or more broadly, I think the board, question is how do we make sure that cemeteries know what their obligations are? And certainly we can work with the association, and we can do training, and we could even maybe do a email reminder of things like that. I'm just throwing those things out there. But that's a topic not necessarily related to this particular application. Is there anything with that in regard, you're just pointing that out?
Yeah, Mark, I did want to outline a couple of other options available to the board for the board's consideration because the cemetery did not erect the columbarium in accordance with our rules. Not-for-profit corporation law section 1504 gives the board the option to impose a civil penalty upon a cemetery corporation not exceeding $1,000 after conducting an adjudicatory hearing pursuant to the provisions of the SAPA for violation or failure to comply with any of the provisions contained in this article. Another option, also under 1504, would be to order any cemetery to do such acts as may be necessary to comply with the provisions of this article or any rules adopted by the cemetery board, or to refrain from doing any actions or violations thereof. So the board could contemplate either an imposition of a fine or ordering the cemetery to come to compliance, which may include removing the columbarium, which is why I was asking if any remains any place within it. That would certainly be a factor that the board should consider.
All right. So you're outlining to the board our options. One is to approve, two is to levy a fine subject to a hearing, and three is to find a way to enforce compliance, which could include removal of the columbarium and stepping back and doing the notice and all of that.
Yes,
ma'am. So that's the board's options. Thank you for that, Rob. I think that's very important that the board is reminded of its options. I take it from the presentation that the division generally would recommend approval as opposed to other options. But
Yeah, I would like to get the board of this cemetery, the next time we do a Cemetery 101 in Western New York, I would like to strongly encourage a couple of their trustees to attend. I wouldn't since we don't have one scheduled right now, I wouldn't recommend conditioning the application of that in any way, shape, or form. And I don't think any sanction beyond that is appropriate here.
Okay, is there anybody from the cemetery that's online?
I don't think anyone was available.
Okay. If they wanted to address the board. Okay, well, those things are before the board. Tom, do you have any ideas?
No, I think that was well explained.
Okay, Jill, do you have any thoughts?
My only thought is that, and Louis, I asked, whether this is possible. I know you mentioned encouraging them next time there's Cemetery Board 101 to participate in that. But could we condition approval on them participating?
Lewis said we could.
You know, I
but we
think,
don't have-
you know, because I think, you know, if, I would not be in favor of imposing a monetary penalty or asking for any sort of, you know, moving the structure. But I do think that given, again, even if it's a completely different board composition now than in 1996, if this is the second time, I don't think that, I think it would be helpful for them to have board members attend the Cemetery Board 101. And if we could, I would suggest making that part of the approval.
And I'd be happy to do that if we actually had something scheduled.
Well, if we don't have it, I mean,
So
it could be, you know, when and if it's scheduled, they'll be notified and they'll attend. If it's not scheduled, we don't have it, you know, we don't. But I would like that if it's made available, that this particular board be required to avail themselves of it.
Lewis, has there been other cemeteries that have been in the same situation in the past that we've?
The only thing I can think of is that we had a cemetery that went ahead with a project knowing they needed our approval and just went ahead and kept working on it anyway, even though we hadn't gotten to it yet. And we included a small monetary penalty on that one and required one of the officers to do essentially community service to other cemeteries. That was a large cemetery, it's a little different. I mean,
I would modify your suggestion, Jill, only because when and if we schedule the training, you know, there is some question about their particular availability at a particular time. So
Okay.
I agree with you, though. I agree with you that we should do something else to try to make sure that this particular cemetery avails of training. So I would just say that I would recommend approving the application and instructing the division to notify the cemetery of the next training and or provide, you know, a particular training to the board. You can do that through WebEx.
Yes.
We've discovered that things can be done remotely, so we could do a training for them and maybe some other folks individually, and you know, it doesn't have to be in the area. You can do a training on those rules. So I agree with you, John. It seems like, you know, again, it's in part a process of a product of people just not knowing, and it's also a potential product of asking for forgiveness rather than permission. And we need people to be coming to the board with their applications. I mean, we need to enforce the rules at some level. So.
phrasing it that way is better.
Okay, so I'm going to make that motion to approve the application of Woodlawn Cemetery for a nunc-pro-tunc, for a columbarium nunc-pro-tunc, and instructing the division to notify the cemetery of the next available training opportunity, and asking them to, you know, to attend and to find any other way in which to make sure that the board is trained on the regulations that we require. Do I have a
I'll second.
second? Sounds okay to council?
Yes, it sounds okay. Council.
Thank you, council. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. Next one is West Monroe Cemetery, another nunc-pro-tunc request for land purchase. Is someone going to present that to us?
This is Mike Seelman. West Monroe Cemetery is a 4-acre rural cemetery located in Oswego County. They realized that they had only 2 graves left to sell, and they had been pursuing the only adjoining land to the existing cemetery, which is directly behind the cemetery and on the west side of the cemetery, as well as a 20-foot strip on the east side of the cemetery. They applied for, they submitted an application for approval to purchase this land, but ended up closing within a short time after the application was received by the division, and before the accountant had gone out to look at the books, and before the investigator was involved. So they ended up purchasing a total of 1.55 acres for $20,000. They received one appraisal that appraised the land at $19,000. They attempted to get a second appraisal. However, the appraiser that they contacted declined to provide an appraisal. I asked the cemetery about this, and their response was that this was at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, and they were unable to get someone to come out and do the other appraisal. The reason that they were interested in purchasing this property is that it is the only property that's abutting the cemetery that was not developed and would be available for use as cemetery property. The parcel that they bought is, I guess it's a hay field, so it will not require extensive development to be used for burial. As of last week, there had not been any burials made in this area. And the fact, I guess, that they had 2 graves remaining to sell and they averaged 13 burials a year prompted them to go ahead and make this purchase. If there's any financial questions, I'll yield to the accountant.
Yeah, Mike, I have just sort of another background question to tease out. Is the board that went ahead and closed the same board they have now?
I believe so. I don't believe there's been a change in the board, no.
Okay. I think I was confusing this with a different, different cemetery.
Because it was recent, right?
Right.
They filed with us, but they just didn't wait for approval.
That's correct.
Is there anything, Rob, that you would add to this conversation?
Thank you, Mark. A few things. One, my understanding is that the historical board practice has been to generally require 2 appraisals. There's 1 appraisal here. There's no statutory or regulatory requirement. It just has been long-standing board practice to look for 2 appraisals. And I would just reiterate what I did with the last application. The alternatives to approval could include, financial penalty of up to $1,000 or ordering the cemetery to take actions to come to compliance, which could include here sale of the land.
And I think one other issue is, which I don't know if the division addressed in their report, but the one appraisal was for $19,000. They paid $20,000. I think the general view is that it's in the neighborhood that an appraisal is not a bid, it's not a quote. We don't establish a range in the appraisal, but normally there's a range in appraisal.
I mean, typically, I say more often than not, from what we've seen here, appraisals do establish a range and then come up with a number within that range. This appraiser didn't do that. This appraiser came up with a number, or didn't say he was doing that. He came up with a number. I tend to think that, we've had this discussion before the board that an appraisal really, as you said, establishes a ballpark number, not a precise. Like 21.4 is not what a property is worth in some magical sense.
Well, and it's a sort of limited purchase, right?
Right. In the past, we've had, I think we've had a single appraisal for projects this expensive. Certainly in the $10,000, $12,000, $13,000 range, we've made recommendations. Again, this is in a normal case where they're coming to us for approval before. We've had situations where spending another $500, $600, $700 on an appraisal for a $10,000 piece of land just doesn't make sense. We're going to be hopefully at the October meeting, making a presentation to the board about reconsidering, looking again at what we do with appraisals more broadly. But for this one, I think this is close enough to de minimis that I would submit one appraisal is good enough to establish this. I don't like the fact that the cemetery just went ahead and closed. I don't think they have any good reason for doing it. And on the other hand, it's obvious that they should have bought this land, and that it's going to be beneficial to them.
Well, it is non-pro-tunc, so there's no time frame. We could, and I don't know what the financial status of the cemetery is. We could say, go get another appraisal.
I mean, if we were,
Somebody's on the line, not muted, and just give you a fair warning. And if there was someone from the cemetery would like to address the board, please.
I mean, another possibility would be for the board to say, we'll approve it subject to obtaining court approval. The statute doesn't require court approval anymore, but it still allows for it.
Yeah, I don't know. The board should know their options. It sounds like there's somebody from the cemetery that was interested in addressing the board on this matter. No? Okay. So I guess I'm just throwing it to the board for a discussion then. Again, I do think it's a piece of property that, you know, it wasn't like there were a lot of options. I think the appraisal, while not necessarily according to Hoyle, is probably sufficient, and the price is de minimisly different than the recommended price. So I don't really have and they did file with us, they just didn't wait. So they didn't know about it. They may have been worried about losing the property. I don't really know enough about that. So I'm not, go ahead, Jill.
No, I was just going to ask a question, and maybe we don't know the answer to this, but because they did file with us, and I assume that they filed using an attorney, maybe they didn't, but, you know, in the event that they did file using an attorney and they went ahead and closed without having gotten approval, I wonder whether there was some type of miscommunication between the attorney and the cemetery in terms of, you know, in other words, what I'm saying is perhaps, and again, this is just, I'm just surmising, but the cemetery thought we filed, you know, and then didn't hear back from their attorney about what, and then they closed. I don't know, but in the world of not-for-profit transactions that require, you know, state regulatory approval, that does happen sometimes when there's an attorney involved.
Yeah, the submission to us did not, come from an attorney, but presumably they were represented by an attorney at closing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, same thoughts generally as the last one, better to, you know, get approval rather than ask for forgiveness later. But I think without more detail, the fact that they did file and seek approval indicates to me that they knew they needed approval, and they're, you know, we don't know, and I don't know that we want to go back and ask for more detail. Now, we don't know what happened that, you know, precipitated scheduling that before they actually had the approval. It seems that they had the knowledge that they needed the approval.
Yeah, I agree with that. To me, the mitigating issue is that it's an obvious action for the board to take. They need to get approval, but it's a piece of land that they needed, and that they're virtually out of lots to sell. And so I don't know what conversations we've had with them about their failure to wait for approval. Does anybody want to add something to that, Mike or the accountant?
Well, we certainly have had a discussion that they were, that they should not have gone ahead and purchased the property until they received approval. And their response was urgency of having only 2 graves left, the fact that they had been pursuing this property for at least 10 years, and they finally were able to agree with the seller to purchase it. They had a sense of urgency there. And they also mentioned it was the beginning of the COVID pandemic, and I don't know if they were saying that was a reason that they felt they needed this, but they said it was a factor in the purchase. 2 things I want to add. I don't know if this is the right place to add them, but the current grave price is $700 each. So once all of this 1.55 acres is sold, they will gain $739,000. So they look at that as certainly a benefit to the cemetery. And my understanding is, as far as the appraisal goes, the cemetery did not look to the appraisal to get an appropriate price to offer. The seller realized that they had no other land to purchase adjoining, and the seller set the price. And the cemetery more or less agreed to the price and then got the appraisal because they knew that they were required to get an appraisal. I don't know if that helps any.
Yeah,
I don't think that helps.
No.
I mean, good news, they got an appraisal. I mean, regardless of the urgency or necessity, they still have to pay fair market value.
Yeah.
And that's why we do an appraisal. And in good news, I think they, by luck or crook, they got an appraisal that's close enough, in my opinion, to establish fair market appraisal.
I mean, I don't think that's, I think typically the price is established before they get the appraisal. I don't think cemeteries typically base the price on the appraised value.
No, but we can't approve it if that doesn't.
Right, no, I know, but the fact that the appraisal came in after the fact that it's in the same ballpark, I think is actually typically what happens.
All right, so I leave it open to the board. Again, I think my inclination, despite the failures, would be to approve the application of Protunc, basically based on the fact that there is a necessity for the land, based on the fact that they did get an appraisal that establishes the purchase price being in the neighborhood of fair market value, and they did file with us in the first instance. So I would recommend approval, but I don't know if anybody else has.
I just have one more question. If anybody knows, when the transaction happened, do we know whether it was contingent on getting board approval? In other words, did the agreement between the parties contain a requirement that approval be, all necessary approvals be obtained, in which case sort of you wonder what the status of the transaction is now?
I don't know.
There's nothing, there's no provision of the contract that specifically says regulatory approval.
Mm-hmm.
There is a provision where the seller is warranting that their warrants marketable title. I don't know whether you could argue that it's not marketable if they're not.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that works, because if they were selling, that'd be different.
Well, I'd be open. I mean, again, it seems like they felt like there's a necessity, but they did sort of blatantly ignore the rules. And if they're going to make $750,000 on the long term, say, a fine is not. In fact, the board could levy the fine, and then if they then attended a training or did something, there's some other you could waive it. But I wouldn't be opposed to levying the fine just because they were clearly aware of it. They may have had urgency, but the urgency doesn't mean they can get to not follow the rules.
Let me make a suggestion on that. I think it probably would be helpful for us to provide a write-up as to exactly what happened before you decide on that. I don't think, council can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we could approve the land sale after the fact and reserve our right to issue a notice of non-compliance, a notice of violation anyway.
Good.
And then we can come back to the board with a presentation on that, and we can see whether it's appropriate or not, but at least we will close the book on any questions to the status.
Again, my first inclination was
yeah.
approve. My second, I'm open to the idea that we could reinforce our rules with a fine. I don't see that as being all that arduous and not inappropriate. So I'd be open to that if another board member wanted to do that.
Yeah.
It does take money out of their pocket, but again, they were clear. They knew what they needed to do. It didn't do it. So
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And I also think that, in response to my question, and I'm sorry I don't know who answered it, but that there was some discussion about what happened at the time in reviewing this application. And it sounds like the explanation was we just went forward. We decided that the urgency was there and we knew what we needed to do. And we didn't do it. I don't know that there's another explanation that would change the facts. I am also in favor of approving, but imposing a fine, because I think that also because they didn't come to the division and say, we are absolutely under the gun here in terms of closing this transaction. We need approval by such and such date, in which case it's likely that there could have been some accommodation made for that time sensitivity. I think that I'm in favor. I think this would be really a situation where you would not want to see another cemetery do this and make a calculus that,
and I'd point out, I think I'm right, that levy of fine is subject to a judicial hearing of some sort where they could present a case, right?
Mhm.
They could make a case.
Yeah, the board could direct the division to issue a preliminary notice for proposed fine. Then the cemetery would have an opportunity to protest, and then if they.
So I'll amend my motion to move to approve the land purchase non-pro-tunc and to direct the division to issue a notice of violation. And do that to set the fine now, or is that part of the?
The statute says up to $1,000.
Okay. So
And just to clarify, it's a civil penalty, not a fine.
Okay. So again, I
Civil
would
penalty.
amend my recommendation to also direct the board, the division, to issue a notice of violation of a penalty, civil penalty, up to $1,000, subject to judicial hearing and review. Right? Okay. So that's my amended motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second? All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. Great. I think that was appropriate. Last on our list is New Paltz Rural Cemetery, easement and cemetery renovations. Who's presenting?
Brendan, do you want to do it, or Rob, do you want to do it?
I think Brendan should go through his write-up first, and then I'll.
Okay, Brendan?
Brendan Stanton with the division. New Paltz Rural Cemetery is a medium-sized cemetery located in the town of New Paltz, Ulster County, just outside of the village of New Paltz. They are currently operating a small veteran section in which any veteran in Ulster County can apply to Ulster County for burial rights, grave, and an interment. And Ulster County pays the cemetery for the grave and to perform the interment. That section is nearly full, and Ulster County and their Department of Veteran Services has evaluated the need. How many veterans there are that are going to need burial, I guess, and have determined that they want to develop a more comprehensive veteran cemetery. So instead of creating an entirely new cemetery, What they are proposing to do is to develop the cemetery on land owned by the New Paltz Rural Cemetery Association, continue contracting with the New Paltz Rural Cemetery to purchase graves and perform interments, but the county, Ulster County, will be responsible for maintenance, and they plan to construct some improvements to that land. These improvements include a building, some irrigation and drainage structures or facilities or infrastructure of some nature, separate entrance to this. And so what the Cemetery Association has submitted to us is approval to grant an easement to Ulster County. Ulster County needs a formal easement in order to be able to secure bonds to pay for the improvements that they intend to make. And additionally, the Cemetery Association has applied for approval for cemetery renovation, for the construction of the building, the drainage, and the roadways necessary. This will all be at no cost to the Cemetery Association. The Cemetery Association is very active. They had 87 burials last year, and a sizable amount of these burials, approaching 35%, come from veterans paid for by Ulster County. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship between the two entities. And for those reasons, I recommend approval of this easement, as well as the cemetery renovation or the construction of the aforementioned improvements.
Is there any more information coming from the division, accounting or or anything? Financial impact? There's no financial impact.
No, there's no financial impact on the cemetery.
Okay. Rob, you have some things to add?
Certainly. I just want to remind the board that this was before the board for discussion in February of 2021, and so I tried to, couch a couple of things in response to what was raised during that meeting. I just want to point out that the proposed MOU and easement that was attached to the packet was inadvertently a prior draft. I did circulate an updated draft with track changes, and so relevant to the discussion in February, the cemetery and the county have since clarified that the cemetery will own the columbarium. It will not be the county owning the columbarium, which was a discussion point earlier in the year. And so some changes to the proposed MOU easement make it clear that the cemetery will own and operate the columbarium. I want to thank both the cemetery and the county for their efforts in that front. I also want to point out that this is, in reviewing the draft documents, this is not a management agreement, which was, again, a point of discussion. This is clearly the county providing services under, General Municipal Law 165A, where a municipality can provide services to a cemetery. This looks to be a project squarely within that statute. I want to point out that any material changes or assignment, the MOU and easement are subject to the approval of the cemetery board. I want to highlight again that if the county did not continue to make, I believe it's 20 burials in a 10-year period by section, then the cemetery is then able to return that land for cemetery purposes. And as the division mentioned, the county is generally responsible for maintenance. The cemetery is doing some snow removal, some trash removal after events. But overall, those were the comments I wanted to make in response to the February discussion.
Great. Does the board have any other questions of the division and council?
Sorry, one more thing. I do want to highlight that it is the county and cemetery are still seeking several different approvals. Those are on page 35 of the PDF. So if the board did approve the project, I would recommend that the board make its approval, subject to the approvals listed on page 35, which I'm hoping I can get to as I'm talking. In July, the cemetery relayed that they're looking for project funding from the Ulster County Legislature, Town of New Paltz Planning Board, and Village of New Paltz Planning Board for immunity from zoning under the balance of public interest test. From New Paltz, a highway access permit. From New York State Historic Preservation, there's apparently some sensitive archaeological issues at play. And then, of course, the major renovation application here. One final thing, and it is in the write-up, while the cemetery is looking for approval of the major renovation, is contemplating construction of columbarium. They did not include an application for columbarium in this, so just to make clear that if the board had approved this, it would not be approving construction of the columbarium, that would be a forthcoming application.
I was about to add that, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so I think I'll make a motion to approve the application of New Paltz Rural Cemetery for their easement and cemetery renovations, subject to obtaining all of the approvals enumerated by council in this meeting, and with the understanding that this does not constitute approval of future applications or future developments of columbarium, that those would require a separate application. Was there something I left out there?
No, I think
And subject to, you said subject to all local required approval?
As enumerated by
Yeah.
the council, this is a recorded meeting, we'll have that in the minutes, or it'll be
Yeah, that's
available. And just clarifying that this does not constitute approval for other future projects contemplated by the cemetery or the veteran cemetery. Sounds like a great project for everybody, so I'll look for a second. Second, Pam? Any other questions by board members or discussion? All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Motion carries. I think that concludes our business or our official business. Is there any need to go to executive session? No? Okay. Our next board meeting is October 12th. All right? Second Tuesday.
Yes, it is. Just for mostly relevant to our lives, but a little bit to the board members involved. It's the day after Columbus Day. We're closed, so that may affect delivery and reading and stuff and all that. There will be a day before the meeting doing last minute stuff. Just a reminder. No reason to do anything different.
We'll get stuff out.
We don't do that. We don't do that so much anymore.
Oh,
We just
my
do it
God.
Just so as people know.
Okay. All right, so this is the opportunity for public comment. I open up the meeting to anyone who wants to address matters before the board or any other matters of interest. Do anyone here would like to address the board?
There's no remote comments.
Hi.
Any remote? Yeah, go ahead.
It's
Is there someone who was addressing the
Moylan
board?
from Greece. Subjected you. Yeah, I haven't subjected you to my voice in a long time, so I thought I should at least say hello. I just wanted to make a brief comment on the pricing discussion that you had on Northridge Cemetery. I see my friend Jay Ivler on the call too, who may be a little more senior than me, but about 35 years ago, a really smart man in our industry who we just lost last year at 95, Jim Milne, talked to me about how to price a structure, any structure. And his rule was 3 times cost. And I thought that made a lot of sense. And we've sort of used that. I mean, there's reasons to go higher sometimes and reasons to go lower, but that sort of
make sure that you're going to have money to maintain that structure down the road. To say that the cost of maintenance on any structure is zero is dangerous. You really, Jay's telling me it's 3.5. Okay. So I really think that needs to be looked at. I mean, a lot of cemeteries forget that we're a not-for-profit. They think we're a charity. And they need to be, I don't want to use the word aggressive in pricing, but they need to understand that the funds need to be there in the future for whatever might happen to a structure. Jim Milne also taught us something about pricing, another thing about pricing. It was the 20-20-20 rule. Whenever you sell 20% of any level of crypts, niches, whatever, increase your prices by 20%. That makes sure that you don't have all your eye levels sold out in a hurry and everything at the top and the bottom left over. Maybe this is on our state association to do a better job of working with our members on how to price things. But I think you're just looking at it as you did today was very informative and enlightening. I'm glad you did it, and I'm glad the cemetery took it to heart. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Any others wishing to address the board that are online remotely? Anybody in the building would like to address the board?
Certainly. Hi, David Fleming from the New York State Association of Cemeteries. Nice to see you. I just want to make a couple of quick points based on the information that was, the items that were on the agenda today. This is my probably annual comment on appraisals for cemeteries, and one that has been brought up many times. Yes, there are times where it's very difficult to get multiple appraisals for properties, particularly depending on its location, particularly for smaller cemeteries. So I just want you to keep that in mind. But more importantly, one of the biggest issues we've confronted, at least in the 30 years that I've been working with the industry, is that as members of this board and the division know, and as kind of was alluded to earlier today in the agenda item, sometimes the value of the property adjacent to the cemetery has more value, market value, to the cemetery than it will to anyone else. So if a cemetery is landlocked and there's only one piece of property, and the owner knows that the cemetery is in dire need without the property, that they're going to have to close up shop, it certainly does have a higher value to the cemetery, because they're going to be able to utilize that in certain circumstances fully for the purpose of the cemetery. So please just keep that in mind. I know that's not always the case, but sometimes we have seen where there's been a couple $1,000 difference between what the appraisals are coming in at and what the sale price is. And my argument would be in many circumstances that is a legitimate price because of the value to the cemetery. There's more value to the cemetery. Also on, Mr. Moylan pointed out on, education with our NYSAC members. I think that's, in particular for columbariums, for smaller cemeteries, that is something we're going to have a discussion about. I just want the board to know that many smaller cemeteries who don't have staff and, are relying on volunteer boards don't view a smaller columbarium as a structure. That may not be a legitimate argument, but they view it as it's basically like a big monument that you're putting people in. It's not a mausoleum, particularly smaller units. So in many cases, they just don't realize that they need to apply for approval. And that is an education piece and something that we can work on with our members. And finally, on New Paltz Rural, I just want to sing the praises of NYSAC, actually, because this goes back many years, probably 15 years, where NYSAC changed state statute to allow for co-location of veterans' parcels on existing cemeteries. The idea was we don't need to create additional cemeteries when we already have capacity in upstate cemeteries that can accommodate these veteran sections. So I think it's great. And also, as Able Council pointed out, 165A was actually a change proposed by NYSAC as well that allows for... You
meant Association of Counties, right? No.
The real NYSAC, the Association of Cemeteries, to allow municipalities to provide financial assistance to cemeteries in their localities. And that's an ongoing education effort that the division has been very good at doing with localities and trying to get them to step up and help out some of these small struggling cemeteries, and certainly a piece that's included in the abandoned cemetery regs as we saw them last. So thanks for the opportunity and appreciate being able to be here in person.
Yeah, nice to see you, and we certainly would be glad to work with you on any training opportunities that we can, if you're interested. So, I don't know if there's any other comments. Business.
Mark, I just wanted to say one thing. I wanted to just pick up on something that Mr. Fleming said, and I agree with his remarks about appraisals and fair market value relative to the type of transactions that he was discussing. And I know we will be discussing that issue going forward, and I think it's an important one for us to consider, because I think the situation he describes is one that we see often, and it should be discussed.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I mean, I think, there's obvious opportunities where the property is again, adjacent to the cemetery. That said, we still have to figure out how to document fair market.
Absolutely.
Right? So,
Absolutely.
We also wouldn't want to incentivize adjoining landowners to hold up.
It's an issue, and again, I think it's a great discussion.
It's a good it's a good issue for discussion.
Good discussion for the board, so we'll try to take care of that. I'll make a motion to adjourn. Anybody objecting? Second it? Lunchtime. All in favor? Aye. And thank you all for participating.